Hi everyone, it's Plastic EP here. No matter where you are around the world, I'm glad you could tune in because I've got a very special guest. It's Jude Sutherland Kessler. How are you today, Jude?
I am wonderful. How are you doing?
Where are we coming in live from? You're in the US, yeah?
I am, as you can tell from the drawl, in the southern U.S. I am hailing from Shreveport, Louisiana, and it is about 150 degrees here today. It's sweltering hot summer. So thank you so much for having me on your program. I really do appreciate it.
Jude, no problem. Call me Plastic. All my friends call me Plastic. And I've got to say, and the name came from the 1960s 45, the little records with the four songs, and it's made of vinyl, which is another word for plastic.
Right. But you're anything but you're the real deal.
I got to say, Charles Rosenay's come on, which he usually does, and he said, "Hey, Jude, you look lovely as ever." Okay.
I love that Charles Rosenay. We've been friends for a million years. I think we met in 1993, and I told him what I was doing with the John Lennon series, and he's like, "You are a crazy person. That is too much work. That is too much trouble to do that because I have to footnote almost every single sentence in every single book." And he said, "I don't know. I think you're going to get tired of it." And here I am 35 later, still going at it.
Do you know he's got a big event happening now for John Lennon as a memorial to John Lennon coming up?
Oh, that's wonderful.
A very big event.
When is that going to be?
That's obviously, I think, when John Lennon passed away, I think that date. I'm not sure. It's on his website, I'd say.
And it's a big birthday for John this year, too. So
yeah, maybe that's what he's got, but it's a big event he's got going. And most of the Beatle bands will be playing.
Oh, man. I hope that everything in the world makes it possible for him to do that. You know, it's been difficult for people to get together.
I think it's actually the 9th of the 10th. It's his actual 80th birthday that they're celebrating.
Yep. It's going to be great. Really great. Well, you see Charles, you tell him I said, "Hey, Charles."
You know, Charles, he's like my brother from another mother. I'm in Australia and he's in the US. And I'll tell you what, the guy's one of my biggest supporters. He comes out from nowhere, and I know I'm doing a great interview when he's got time to come and watch this.
He is a really special guy. I've known him when he went from the exclamation marks to the family, Charles. Love his kids, love his wife, just very sweet family.
He's a very nice guy. Anyway, Jude, we've got to talk about your 9-part series on John Lennon, which is fantastic. And it's taken you up to 35 years to get to where you are now. You've released 4 books and you're working on 5. So let's go through the 4 books individually. Just tell me what period that covers, Jude.
Okay, this is the first book. It's, let's see, I'm going to go this way with it. With Astrid's lovely photograph of John that she was very kind enough to allow me to use on the cover. This one is Should Have Been There, and it covers John's life from his birth in 1940 up to the 10th of December, 1961. Now, that crucial night is the night that Brian, during the day, had offered a loose managerial agreement to the Beatles. And John, speaking for the others, had said, "Right, manage us then." And they finally had a manager. So this book encompasses all of John's childhood, including the very complicated and sad situation when he came to live with Mimi and Uncle George at 251 Menlove Avenue in Mendip, to be reared by them instead of his mother, Julia, or his father, Fred. It takes you through his teenage years and all of the trouble that he got into at Quarry Bank Grammar, his high school, with his buddy Pete Shotton, Lennon and Shotton, they call them, as they made their way through school, getting in trouble, unscrewing the chalkboard so that it would collapse onto the floor when the professor wrote on it, or turning a trash can upside down on the teacher's desk, and doing all the things that they did, skiving off from school. And then it takes you through the time.
I also got to say, his other friend here, Michael Hill, there's John, and there's Michael Hill there, and that's another great book. And I've interviewed Michael. They can find him on Plastic EP Live TV. And the guy, the stories he's got to tell is amazing.
I know that he is great. I would give a shout out to my husband too, who published that book for Michael Hill. And we've enjoyed working with Michael, super nice guy. And of course with Dave Bedford, who assisted Michael in putting the book together. And I hear Dave's going to be on your show. He is my Scouse brother. And he, a few years ago, made me an honorary Scouser. So you're two great guys, super great guys. But yeah, Michael was part of this, you know, the growing up years of John, the formative years. In this book, of course, John and Paul meet at the Woolton Garden Fete. And after a few days of kicking it back and forth, because John didn't automatically want Paul in the band. He knew Paul was going to be a threat. He was smart. He was talented. He was good looking. He could tune his own guitar. He was self-confident. He knew who he was. And John thought, if I let him into my band, he's always going to be a struggle. I'm always going to have to fight for leadership of my own band. But the band was more important than self. And so John, a few days later, sent his henchman to go ask Paul to join the band. And Paul kind of shrugged it off and said, well, I got to go to Boy Scout camp. But after Boy Scout camp, I'll come and join the band. And then it takes you through Paul's close relationship with this kid, literally 3 years younger, a kid at the Liverpool Institute, George Harrison, that he pushes John to adopt into the band. And that night at the morgue skiffle cellar, when George just appears, and John said, what's he doing here? Paul said, well, he's going to join the band tonight. And John's like, well, who told him that he could? And Paul said, well, you auditioned him. You like him. He's going to play with us tonight. Sort of, you know, puts the nudge for John to bring him into the band. And he does. And George is absolutely wonderful and creative and a driving force with that great lead mastery that he had. In this book, Ringo is not part of the group. Pete Best is the drummer when they go to Hamburg. And Pete Best is in most of the chapters in this book. But while they're in Hamburg, they meet Rory Storm. Well, they've known Rory Storm and the Hurricanes from Liverpool, but they start to share the stage at the Kaiserkeller with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. In fact, they have a competition with Rory and his drummer, Richie, to see who can destroy the wooden stage at the Kaiserkeller first. They'll jump on it, they pound on it, they stomp their feet on it, and the group that can break it and destroy it first wins a case of champagne. And the Beatles are down the street on break, drinking a beer, waiting to come back on stage when they hear the shouting and screaming from the Kaiserkeller, and they know that Rory has collapsed the stage and has won the bet. I got to see Ringo a few years ago in New York City in a very small venue. I was on the very front row standing watching him perform in Bryant Park, and I held up a sign that said, "Hey, Rich, congrats on smashing the Keller stage before the Beatles." And he just broke into laughter and said, "How did you know that?" So that's all in here. This will take you all the way through those formative years when they are putting the Beatles together right up to the night that Brian offers to manage them. And that's the end of volume 1. That's the Liverpool years, those beginning years. Book 2, which all of this book is sold out, but I have about 4 first editions left. And it is on every ebook format that you could imagine. So you can read it in Kindle and Nook and any ebook format. This one too is sold out in physical form. This one is the hardest to find. It's the most elusive book. Copies of this book, and I get nothing from this, but copies from this book are selling for about $900 each. It's in ebook. You can read it in ebook. This one takes you through 1961 and 1963, when the Beatles are hugely popular, and it's that segment that you and I are fascinated with when they record Please Please Me. In this one, Pete leaves the band, Ringo comes into the band, John and Cynthia are a big item and end up in this book getting married, and having Julian. They record Love Me Do and make a notice on the hit parade and on New Musical Express with Love Me Do, but they don't go to #1. So John is determined that he's going to write a song that will go to #1, and Please Please Me, his single Please Please Me, hits #1, the top of the charts, and they are commissioned to leave the Helen Shapiro tour for a day, go into EMI Studios and record Please Please Me. And we take that chapter minute by minute. I'll hold this up so maybe people can see, but I take you minute by minute through the day, and we see them record each song, what they say, what they do, what they're drinking, what they're taking for their sore throats. And we record the entire LP on that magical day in February. And that book ends when Cynthia has just had Julian. John comes to visit her in hospital and tells her that he is not going to be there when she brings the baby home. Instead, there you go. There it is, the Please Please Me LP. He is going to leave, and he's going to go on holiday with the manager, Brian Epstein, to go to the Spanish Riviera. Now, people always call that the Barcelona trip, but Barcelona was only 2 days of this big excursion that he took with Brian to the Spanish Riviera, and that's the end of book 2. Book 3 opens on the Spanish Riviera, and my husband drew this picture of John for the cover. Bill Harry does the forward for all of the books. Bill has been involved from the very first day, and he always writes the forward for the books. And Larry Kane also wrote a forward for this book as well. So this takes you from the Spanish Riviera through the rise of Beatlemania. The Beatles, this is 1963 and just a smidgen of 1964, but the Beatles play the London Palladium. They are skyrocketing to fame in Britain. Girls are screaming wherever they go. They're running them down. Beatlemania is full scale. They're chosen to play the Royal Command performance. And that's when John says, those in the cheaper seats, clap your hands, and those in the more expensive seats, rattle your jewelry. And, you can always tell when John is getting ready to say something naughty, because every time he does, he scratches his sideburn, and he knows he shouldn't be doing it. That's his nervous tell. But he does that night. They find out that they're going to Paris for 3 weeks at the beginning of 64 to perform. And while they're in Paris, they find out that they've gone to #1 in the U.S. Finally, they've gone to #1. And they have a gigantic pillow fight because they are headed to the U.S. to play 3 Ed Sullivan shows, to perform in Washington, D.C. in the Round and the Washington Coliseum, and then to take the boards at Carnegie Hall, something a rock and roll band has never done, to perform there. And they're going there with a #1 under their belts. And when they finish their experience in the U.S. and get ready to fly back to England, they're on the plane going back to England when this book ends. Now, let me show you one thing, and then I'll show you book 4. In the back of the book, let's see if I can get it over here. Every single sentence, because it's written as a narrative. You read it as if you were reading a novel. It seems like a story. Every single sentence in the book is documented and footnoted. There were 4,400 footnotes in this book, because people were like, well, how would she know that? How do you know that that's true? Is that factual? I give you all the sources. This is what Mark Lewison says. This is what Bill Harry says. This is what Philip Norman says. This is what Hunter Davies says. And at the end of each chapter, we compare and contrast the things that the various biographers said. So at the end of every chapter, which has been reading like a novel, I ask additional questions, like, was Brian in studio that night? And then I tell you, this is what Mark Lewison says. This is what Bill Harry says. This is what Hunter Davies says. And we go through and we compare and contrast all of the information to get to the kernel of truth. I'll give you just an example of that. There is a long-held legend that John and George tried LSD, that dentist that gave them LSD in his house and their coffee, on the 27th of March, 1965. Well, I've spent the last month researching everything about that. I have 71 typed pages of notes about what I've called, I'll show you, the LSD incident. And you can see there are pages and pages and pages and pages of notes on this. It could not have been the 27th of March because on the 28th of March, they had to drive to Birmingham to appear on their last live performance on Thank Your Lucky Stars. And in order to do that, it's a 2-hour and 38-minute trip today. Probably took almost 3 hours back when you were traveling in 1965. They had to get up and be in studio by 1 in the afternoon. And John and George and Cynthia and Patty all talk about going to George's house in Esher where they puttered. The sun was up by the time they got there. They puttered, George playing guitar, John drawing sketches, Cynthia trying to vomit and get the LSD out of her system, Patty cuddled up with her cat. That's at about 8 or 9 in the morning. And then they go home to Kenwood and fall asleep and sleep for hours. So there's no way on Sunday morning when they were doing all of that, they could have been also en route to Birmingham to be on a 1 o'clock show. Not to mention the fact that John was in no condition to be on the show that day. It had to be the following Saturday, which is March the 4th. That day, they had nothing on Sunday. That day would have been the date. That's the kind of thing that I burrow to find the kernel of the truth. So the very last book that's out, yes.
Yeah, we'll go through the last book, but I just want to ask you 3 quick questions.
Okay.
I've got a friend of mine online now. They're asking if they're going to make a Beatles biographical movie. Do you know anything about that, if they will or they may?
I would absolutely love it. I would be very honored. These books, as we say, have taken me 35 years of research, 7 trips to Liverpool. Everyone who has a chapter in one of these books has been asked to read their chapter and change it. So Bill Harry said, no, Jude, you've got me in the wrong room at Ye Crack. You need to move me to the back room. You need to seat me under the painting of Lord Nelson. And you have me drinking ale. I only drank bitters. That's how detailed this is. June Furlong, who was the life model at Liverpool College of Art, and John was enamored with her because she was famous and he wanted to be famous. And he followed her around everywhere she went, said, oh no, Jude, no, you don't have the tendril hanging down on the left side. I always had a tendril hanging down there, and you don't have me with balanced on my right big toe. It's detailed, very, very detailed, so that I'm trying to tell the story exactly as it occurred. Would love to make a movie of it, but so far no offers. So anyone out there, I'd love to do that. Would love to. You want me to tell you about this one, or did you want to ask me something else?
No, I'll ask you some questions in a moment. Let's go to book 4. It's fascinating stuff.
So book 4 picks up as they have landed at London Airport, which people erroneously call Heathrow. At that time, it was not called Heathrow. Mark Lewison is absolutely, of course, spot on when he says that at that point, it was still known as London Airport. They land there to screaming masses who have missed them during their time in the U.S. And they have a couple of days off, and then they begin the filming of A Hard Day's Night. Now, to me, this book, it's the hardest time that the Beatles ever endured. They are getting up at 6:30 in the morning, something they're not used to doing because they like to stay up all night and sleep in the morning and get up around noon, 1 o'clock. They're getting up at 6:30 a.m. to go in hair and makeup because at promptly 8 a.m. they start filming A Hard Day's Night. When everyone else takes a lunch break, on their lunch hour, they have to talk with reporters and interviewers and journalists and have photographs made, and then they go back to work again. At 5 o'clock, when all the other actors go home, the Beatles they go to television studios to make television specials. They make live appearances. They do some work in the studio on the soundtrack. They work until 10 o'clock at night, most nights. And then when John Lennon goes home, the man that is assisting him in writing his first book, Tom Mashler from Jonathan Cate Publishers, is waiting for John to make sure that John works from 10 until midnight on the new book that he has coming out at the end of March, doing his edits, doing his illustrations, and putting the book together. Look, writing a book alone is enough stress without being a Beatle, making a movie, doing interviews, doing television shows. The work schedule is relentless. When Mashler leaves at midnight, John takes an hour, gets something to eat, tries to wind down so he can sleep for 5 hours before he has to get up and do it all again. And this goes on for almost 2 months. I mean, so much stress. When they finally end the movie and the film is ready to go into production, John and Cynthia and George and Patty escape for a few days to Ireland, to Dromoland Castle, to have a little romantic time. But the press is on them after the first night. And they are surrounded. The hotel is surrounded. They finally have to come up with an ingenious way of getting away from the press. They grab swords from the wall of the castle and they start to have a sword fight. And they do all this shenanigans and fight with each other. And finally, they say, excuse us, we're going to run in and grab bigger swords. And they run into the castle and they run out a back door and get on the floorboard of a car. And the driver takes them out and they go to the Cliffs of Moher for the day and they escape the press. But there's no escape. They are always working. They do in this book their first world tour. And of course, if you've talked with Jim Berkenstadt, you have talked with Jim about the Beatle who vanished, Jimmy Nicol. This encompasses that time that Jimmy Nicol is playing with the Beatles on their first world tour, because Ringo is in hospital with tonsillitis and in University Hospital in London. And he misses 13 days of the tour before he can rejoin them. But exciting, exciting times in Hong Kong and in Australia and New Zealand. And they do this great world tour before they come back to do both the London and the Liverpool premiere of A Hard Day's Night. Now, they're scared to death going back to Liverpool for the Liverpool premiere because they think people are going to be, there you go, The Beatle Who Vanished by Jim Berkenstadt could not have written the chapters in this book on the 1964 World Tour without the invaluable information that Jim Berkenstadt provided. And they are making Jim's book into a movie right now. It's going to be yeah.
I've got to say, go out there and get Jim's book, The Beatle Who Vanished, because it's fascinating stuff. And I mean, just make sure you go on the web there and look up the book, The Beatle Who Vanished, because Jim has done a fantastic job. And if you really want to know about Jimmy Nicol, that's the Bible on Jimmy Nicol, that book there. Like your books, Jude, I'm amazed with the detail and how big those books are and the work and the effort that you've made to research those books. That's unbelievable. I'll let you carry on that book.
It's really slow work because, you have to write one sentence, then you footnote it, then you go back and you put all the sources where you found that information. And then you put, if there are any discrepancies, for example, the night that I was telling you about, the LSD night, when John and Cynthia and George and Patty were tricked by that dentist into taking LSD. One source says that the dentist followed them to the Pickwick Club in a taxi. Another source says he followed them to the Pickwick Club in his own car. Another source says he followed them to the Pickwick Club in his own car and his fiancee, Cindy Burry, was with them. Another source says they didn't go to the Pickwick Club, which they did. There's so many contradictions. It takes so long to put all of the information. Then you write another sentence. Then you go back and do the same thing. I told my husband that it took me probably an hour and a half to write 3 paragraphs the other night. It's very, very slow go. But back to this. So they go on the world tour. They come back. They go to those premieres, and they're scared to death to go to Liverpool. They think the people in Liverpool are going to be mad at them because they moved to London. They had to move to London logistically to do their recording, to do their work. They had to go to the smoke, as they called it. But they love Liverpool. They always love Liverpool. In fact, when John is living in New York City in the Dakota, there is a picture of Quarrybank Grammar, his high school, above his bed. He always loved Liverpool, never left it behind. But they start flying there. They're sick. They're nauseated. They're sure that the people are going to reject them, that no one is going to come to the premiere. And as they begin to get near what is now John Lennon International Speke Airport, and they look down, they see what looks like thousands of ants crawling all over the ground. And as they begin to come down closer and closer, they see that 8 rows deep from the airport all the way into downtown, miles and miles and miles and miles, there are hundreds of thousands of their friends screaming and shouting and embracing them. It is a glorious day. It's one of the most emotional chapters in the book as they go home for this wonderful reception, and everybody loves them. And John's family is there, his sisters, Jackie and Julia, and all of his aunts and uncles. And it's just a happy day. He rarely has happy days, but that was a happy day. Then we go day by day by day on the U.S. North American tour as they go from city to city to city. And I was so lucky to be able to talk with Ivor Davis, who toured with the Beatles and was there every single day, and to get his amazing stories of what happened because he was there. Art Schreiber, who was there, and get all of his stories of what he remembers. Larry Kane, who was there, and get all of his great stories about what he remembers. I've talked to every DJ in every city who introduced them. I talked to this great guy named John Trusty, who was in the area where the Beatles were going to perform. They were going to Jacksonville to do a concert, but they couldn't go to Jacksonville because Hurricane Dora hit. So they had to fly to Key West and stay in a hotel there waiting for the hurricane to subside so they could go into Jacksonville. They go to the bar that night, and John Trusty is in the bar, and oh my gosh, the Beatles are here. And they come walking in flip-flops and casual clothes, and just, John had on a ruffled white shirt that he had rolled up at the sleeve and a pair of jeans and glasses, like that would disguise him. Everybody knew it was John Lennon, And he's sitting at the bar, and John makes his way over there to try to get next to him. And John Lennon turns to John Trusty and says, "Fancy a fag then?" John, being a boy from Mississippi and has no idea Scouse terminology, says to John Lennon, "No thanks, I'm here for the chicks." Oh my gosh. He realizes as soon as he says that John was offering him a cigarette, and not at all what he thought John was offering him. And he's humiliated, and just John laughs at him, shakes his head and laughs at him, and gets up and walks away. And he is just devastated that he didn't say the right thing. Sure, yeah, great, and smoke with John and have a friendship with John. But after that, John Trusty made it his life's mission to meet every single person that was on that tour and make friends with them. The Exciters, Frogman Henry, the stewardesses from the plane. He connected with everyone on that tour and connected me with everyone on that tour so that I was able to write this book. Couldn't have written it without John Trusty. And John got the stewardesses on the plane to give me a few little items from that 1964 tour. This is the booze bottle that Paul McCartney was drinking on the plane. The stewardesses thought, because Paul has that baby face, that he was too young to have alcohol. And he would ask for a mixed drink, and they would say, "No, it's illegal." He's like, "I'm old enough." And they never would believe him. So he finally pinched this one out of their cart, and the stewardesses took it from him. And so that's how I ended up with it. These are John's forks from the plane on the 1964 tour. Betty Birdsell, one of the stewardesses, sent it to me and said, she just passed away 2 weeks ago. And she said, "I wanted you to have these because I know no one would treasure them more than you do." But I got all of Betty's stories, all the stewardesses that were there. There's a wonderful city called Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, and they are the host to Beatles at the Ridge, which is a great Beatles convention and festival every September. The Beatles went to Walnut Ridge, Arkansas to go up into the Ozark Mountains for a few days of rest and relaxation during the time that they were on this 1964 tour. And they did this very covertly under the dark of night at midnight on a Friday night. Well, big planes, did not land in Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, ever. And when that gigantic plane went over the top of that town, shaking the little kind of a Dairy Queen that they had there, a little ice cream, mom and pop ice cream shop, the owner sent 3 young boys, recent graduates from high school, out to the airport to find out who in the world was landing at midnight in this little town in Arkansas. To their amazement, it was the Beatles, and they're great stories about what they did and who they met and what they saw. There you go. Nothing, it was very real. And it's the great stories and photos of them in Arkansas for this unbelievable occasion. In every other city that the Beatles went to, the fans screamed and carried on and were really, live wires. But the fans in Walnut Ridge, and this is a picture of John getting back on the plane in Walnut Ridge. You can see the truck pulled up there. He's been there for a few days, and he's getting back on the plane to head to New York City for their concert that they're doing for charity at the end of September. But the fans are warned by the mayor. He says to them, "You're not going to scream. You're not going to shout. You're not going to throw things. You're going to stand like ladies and gentlemen, and you're going to watch the Beatles get on the plane in silence." And they do. And the mayor goes up and says, "Is there any way that the Beatles could at least come out and sign autographs?" And John says, "Sure, we'll be glad to." And Paul says, "No, we're tired. We're worn out. Just tell them you won't let us," to Neil Aspinall. So they don't come out. And I'm sure that city felt gypped and cheated. But fast forward 20 years and the city is dying on the vine. There's no industry there. There's no anything to promote Walnut Ridge, and every store is closing. They have a meeting of the town fathers and mothers, and they say, "What do we have that might save our town possibly?" And someone says, "We have the Beatles. They landed here in 1964. So they retooled the city to become a Beatles haven. Beatles shops, Beatles eateries, they named the streets, Blue Jay Way and Abbey Road, and they have this festival once a year, and that has brought life back to the city. They have McDonald's, and they have stores, and they have a huge facility for Homeland Security that has just moved to Walnut Ridge, all through the miracle of the Beatles. So, the love that you make and the love that you take, they were nice to the Beatles, and when they needed something 20 years later, the magic of the Beatles came back to them. So all of that is in here. This book ends when the Beatles have completed not only that North American tour, but the making of Beatles for Sale, Day by Day, their UK tour, their Christmas record, and they are ending up the year of 1964 utterly worn out and exhausted, but facing it all again, same year again, in 1965. And that's the 1965 book is the one I'm working on right now. Phew!
Now, Jude, I got to say, that's fantastic. Now, what I want to do is, we're going to end it there because that episode there is just great. I've just got to ask you, where do they find you now on the net if they're after your book or more information about yourself, if you could tell everyone?
Sure. I'm on Facebook. I have 2 pages. Jude Sutherland Kessler is my personal page, and I rarely ever post anything on that. If you want to keep up with the John Lennon series, I have a page, Jude Sutherland Kessler's John Lennon series page. And all of my John Lennon series stuff, rare photos, contests, updates on the book are all on that Facebook page. I'm on Twitter at Jude Kessler, and I'm on Instagram as the John Lennon series. And then I have a podcast with my friend Lena Stagg, who is the author of the Recipe Record series, which is the best series of rock and roll cookbooks you'll ever see. It's got stories about rock bands, trivia about rock bands. It's got great recipes themed on rock and roll, and every recipe has a song list that goes with it. So as you're cooking up in the kitchen, you just ask who to play those songs for you, and she will, so you can rock out and rattle those pots and pans. She and I do a debate show. We debate what Beatles movie is the best, Help or Hard Day's Night. who was best, the Stones or the Beatles? So we do a debate show and we have guests come on, and it's called She Said, and we have our own She Said page on Facebook. The John Lennon series, so johnlennonseries.com is my website. You can order the books there. You can read sample chapters, have a video of me reading one of the chapters so that you can enjoy that. And you can buy it there, or you can buy copies of the book on Amazon, anywhere that books are sold, or on the BeatlesBookstore.com, which is Dave Bedford's bookstore. I'm sure he'll talk about that tomorrow, BeatlesBookstore.com. And that's another, or my beloved thefast.com, which is the Fast for Beatles fans, run Lo These Many Years by Mark and Carol Lapidus and their daughters, Jessica and Michelle. They are like family to me. In fact, I say, even though Mark and Carol are just about my age, that they're my mom and dad, and they have always been supportive of the book. So also thefast.com. And I would just appreciate anyone taking this journey with John. I have 38 copies of this book left. So if you want a physical book, this one is the only one that I still have copies of. All of the others are in ebook format, unless someone wants a first edition of Should Have Been There. And I do have 4 copies of that left. And that's all. People have been so kind to buy the book. So I appreciate it.
Jude, for our first episode, I can't thank you enough, and I can't wait for the second episode. Thank you so much, Jude.
Thank you very much. And even though your friends call you plastic, you are the real deal.
Thank you, Jude. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Thank you.